Tokyo, the night of November 24th, 1944. The city sleeps beneath a pale moon. From the Imperial Palace to the crowded wooden districts of Shitamachi, every window is dark. Japan still believes its skies are safe, but hundreds of miles away, over the Black Pacific, engines roar against the wind. The sound is deep, mechanical, relentless. It belongs to something new, something Japan has never faced. 45 bombers, each the size of a small ship, slice through the thin air at 30,000 feet. Their silver wings shimmer in the moonlight. B-29 superfortresses, America's most powerful war machines. Radar stations on the Izu Peninsula suddenly come alive. A frantic operator shouts into his headset. Unknown formation, approaching Honshu. Sirens begin to rise across Tokyo, echoing through narrow streets. And for the first time in the war, Japanese fighter pilots are ordered to defend their own capital. They scramble into the cold night, unaware that history itself is crossing the sky toward them. For more than 3 years, the Japanese home islands had lived with an illusion that the Pacific Ocean itself was their greatest shield. When Japanese forces attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the empire's territory stretched across half the Pacific. Guam, Wake, the Philippines, and vast portions of Southeast Asia were now under the rising sun. Tokyo was untouchable, protected by thousands of miles of water and the nation's fierce naval power. But by mid-1944, that shield was cracking. The United States, now fighting a war of attrition, had turned its industrial might into a tide of steel. Carrier task forces struck deep into Japanese territory, and amphibious assaults moved relentlessly westward, island by island. The fall of Saipan in July 1944 marked a turning point. For the first time, American bombers could reach Japan itself. Anti-aircraft crews around Tokyo manned their guns, Type 88 75mm cannons, designed for older, slower bombers. None had radar-guided fire control. In the darkness, they relied on searchlights and sound ranging. The American gamble for the Americans, everything depended on this first raid. The B-29 had been years in development, and Washington demanded proof it could deliver. General Hansel planned meticulously: timing, altitude, formation spacing, and bomb loads. Each B-29 would carry a mix of high-explosive and incendiary bombs, targeting the Musashino plant and surrounding urban sprawl. But there was risk. The weather over Japan was unpredictable, dominated by the newly discovered jet stream, fierce winds exceeding 150 miles per hour. Early test flights had shown that bombs dropped from such heights could drift miles off target. Navigators struggled with instruments frozen by cold, and engines routinely failed under strain. Still, the crews were confident. They called their mission San Antonio the Wind, the first strike in a campaign that would bring the war to Japan's doorstep. As the sun set on November 24, 1944, 111 B-29s began taking off from Saipan. Their 4-engine roars shook the ground for hours. Each crewman knew this was history, the longest overwater bombing mission ever attempted. Above the dark Pacific, formation lights blinked in silence as the planes climbed into the night. The vast black ocean stretched below them, endless, empty, and deadly. Approaching Tokyo, by midnight, the Japanese radar network lit up in panic. Operators tracked the massive formation crossing Izu Bay. Telephone lines buzzed through the night as warnings rushed to command centers. Over Tokyo, anti-aircraft crews swung their guns toward the horizon. Pilots ran to their aircraft, engines roaring to life. Civil defense sirens began to scream across the city. The calm illusion of safety that had protected Tokyo for 3 years was shattered. From the south, under the thin moonlight, 100 silver bombers approached, silent giants gliding toward the capital of the empire. And in that moment, for the first time in centuries, the people of Tokyo looked to the sky and saw the enemy coming. In war, numbers can deceive. The reports that night spoke of 111 aircraft, 500 tons of bombs, and altitudes beyond 30,000 feet. But behind those figures were men, tired, cold, and terrified, flying through darkness toward a city none of them had ever seen. Inside the B-29 Dauntless Dottie, commanded by Colonel Robert Morgan, the same man who had flown the legendary Memphis Belle over Europe, the crew worked in near silence. Frost crept over their oxygen masks. Cabin heaters struggled to fight the sub-zero cold. Every man knew the engines could ignite at any moment. At those altitudes, temperatures plunged to 40 degrees. Fuel lines froze. Lubricants thickened, and the roar of 4 massive engines filled every inch of the pressurized fuselage. They had been briefed. Expect no escort. You're on your own. Below them, only the black Pacific stretched endlessly. Navigator Lieutenant Don Evans stared at his instruments. The magnetic compass was unreliable at such heights, and celestial navigation depended on glimpses of stars through breaks in the clouds. Every correction mattered. One mistake, and the bomber could vanish forever into the sea. Yet, inside every aircraft, a quiet determination held firm. Each crewman had seen the photographs. Pearl Harbor, Bataan, the Pacific graves. For them, this mission was not just military. It was retribution. Voices in the darkness. On the other side of that sky, Tokyo slept uneasily. In narrow alleys and wooden houses, blackout curtains covered every window. The sound of the first sirens began as a distant hum, then grew into a mechanical wail that echoed through every district. Civilians hurried outside, eyes searching the horizon. Many had heard rumors that new American bombers could cross oceans, that no place was safe. But until this moment, it had been just talk. Now, the deep rumble of engines rolled through the night air. It was unlike anything they had heard before. Low, steady, and endless. Dogs barked. Children cried. In the darkness, some whispered prayers. Others climbed rooftops to see what was coming. At the same time, in airfields around Chofu and Atsugi, Japanese fighter pilots raced toward their planes. Most were young, barely 20 years old, trained hurriedly after the heavy losses of 1943. Second Lieutenant Yoshio Muto pulled on his flight gloves, breath fogging the canopy as he climbed into his Kai-44 Shoki. His aircraft, fast but unstable, was one of the few that could climb toward the approaching bombers. Ground crews shouted final checks, and within minutes, engines roared to life across the airfield. But as the first squadrons took off, they quickly realized the scale of what they faced. The B-29s flew higher than expected, far above the reach of most interceptors. Their formation lights glimmered faintly in the moonlight, like distant stars. Muto pushed his throttle forward, climbing steeply, but his oxygen system faltered. Ice formed along the canopy edges. His guns froze in the cold. He would later describe the moment. They were too high. We could see them. Silver dots, but could not reach them. We fired, but the bullets disappeared into the night. Eyes on the ground below, anti-aircraft batteries fired blindly into the darkness. Searchlights crisscrossed the sky, their beams cutting through smoke and thin clouds. The gunners had little hope. The B-29s flew at altitudes beyond their effective range. The shells exploded far below the bombers, leaving only streaks of light fading into the sky. In command bunkers, officers listened to the reports. Each message was the same. Enemy formation overhead. Altitude too high. They could hear the bombs falling, but could do nothing to stop them. For the people on the ground, the first explosions were surreal. At 12:15 a.m., the Musashino aircraft plant took a direct hit. The blast shattered nearby windows for miles. Within minutes, flames began to rise. Tokyo's night sky, once perfectly dark, now glowed orange. The American view from above, the B-29 crews watched the distant flashes with grim satisfaction. Each bombardier, peering through the Norden bomb site, called out coordinates as the city unfolded beneath them. The target was barely visible, masked by haze and moonlight. "Bombs away," one crewman whispered. The aircraft lurched upward as the weight released, and glowing specks fell away into the blackness. Seconds later, far below, the fire bloomed. But not all bombers hit their mark. Jet streams, powerful winds the crews barely understood, blew their bombs miles off course. Some missed entirely, scattering destruction across Tokyo's suburbs. Still, the psychological impact was immense. For the first time, the capital of Japan was under direct attack. As the bombers turned southward to return to Saipan, many crews stared silently at the burning glow fading behind them. It was visible for more than 150 miles, a pillar of light rising over the ocean. The night Japan awoke. In Tokyo, chaos reigned. Civilians fled through narrow alleys as debris fell from the sky. Fire brigades rushed toward the Musashino district, their engines sputtering and hoses frozen by the cold. Few had seen anything like it. The sound of falling bombs, the orange glare on the horizon, and the faint silhouettes of massive aircraft drifting above. It felt like the end of the world. By dawn, the sky was quiet again. But everyone who had lived through that night would remember the sound, the deep, steady hum of engines over Tokyo, a sound that marked the beginning of the end. To understand why that night changed everything, one must understand what the Japanese were up against. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress was not just a bomber. It was a flying leap into the future. At a time when most aircraft were made of riveted aluminum and guided by little more than a compass and courage, the B-29 introduced systems that belonged to the jet age. It flew at altitudes where most Japanese planes could barely breathe. Its pressurized cabins kept crews alive at 31,000 feet, a height at which human blood boiled without protection. The heart of the Superfortress was its technology. 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines delivered 2,200 horsepower each. The engines powered not only the propellers, but also the aircraft's electrical systems, including 5 remotely controlled gun turrets. These turrets were guided by analog computers, the first of their kind, allowing gunners to track enemy fighters through reflective sights and engage them with deadly accuracy. No Japanese aircraft had ever faced a bomber that could see and shoot in every direction at once. To pilots accustomed to attacking slow, unprotected bombers like the B-17 or B-24, the B-29 was a fortress in every sense of the word. The high-altitude war, but this advantage came at a cost. The B-29 was a mechanical nightmare to maintain. Its massive engines overheated easily, catching fire if pilots pushed the throttle too hard. Crews trained to balance power output and cooling flaps, like surgeons managing a patient's heartbeat. Every mission meant a race against mechanical failure, and at 30,000 feet over the Pacific, failure meant death. Japan's interceptors, meanwhile, were designed for agility and short-range engagements. The Mitsubishi A6M-0, once the pride of the Imperial Navy, was nearly useless at the B-29's altitude. Its thin wings and unsupercharged engine suffocated in the thin air. Even the newer Ki-44 Shoki, and J-2M Raiden, aircraft built specifically to climb, struggled to reach the bombers before oxygen systems froze or engines stalled. For Japanese pilots, it was like fighting ghosts. They could see the silver dots high above them, unreachable and indifferent, raining fire from the edge of the stratosphere. The radar struggled. Japan's radar network, though extensive on paper, was fragile in practice. The early warning stations built along the coasts relied on British-inspired Type A and Type B sets, operating on low frequencies and prone to interference. In clear weather, they could detect incoming aircraft at 150 kilometers, but they lacked precision. When the first B-29 formation approached Tokyo, the radar screens filled with static. Operators misread altitudes, often mistaking bomber clusters for clouds or echoes. Communication between stations was slow. Telephone lines were easily damaged or jammed. By the time confirmation reached the Central Command, the bombers were already above the capital. Japan's command system, built for local defense, was never meant to handle an intercontinental strike. The Americans, on the other hand, had radar-assisted bombing systems like the AN/APQ-13, a microwave radar that allowed bombardiers to identify coastlines and cities even through cloud or darkness. In the Pacific's unpredictable weather, it was revolutionary. That night, when Tokyo was covered in haze and moonlight, the radar scope was the bombardier's eye. Though many bombs missed due to jet streams, the fact that the attack even reached its target area under such conditions stunned Japanese observers. The enemy below, the Japanese gunners firing from rooftops and anti-aircraft positions, faced an impossible task. Their guns, mainly 75mm and 88mm cannons, could not reach the altitudes at which the B-29s cruised. The shells burst far below, useless fireworks in the night sky. Sound-ranging devices and searchlights gave them only seconds to react. The B-29s flew too high, too fast, and too spread out. To make matters worse, Tokyo's air defense units were short on ammunition and training. Many of the gunners were older reservists or civilian volunteers. Some had never fired at an aircraft before. As the bombers crossed overhead, they watched helplessly, their tracer rounds vanishing into darkness. The tactical shift. The night of November 24th was only the beginning. In the following weeks, American planners studied the mission's results with a cold precision. Photographic reconnaissance revealed limited damage to the Musashino plant. Barely 2% of its production capacity had been destroyed. For General Hansel, it was a painful lesson. Precision bombing from 30,000 feet was nearly impossible over Japan. The winds, the weather, the distance, all combined to scatter the payloads. But technology had already opened a door that could not be closed. The same systems that had allowed the B-29 to strike Tokyo could be adapted for new tactics: low-altitude firebombing, radar bombing, and round-the-clock operations. The U.S. command began to rethink its philosophy. If altitude and accuracy could not win the war, then volume and fire would. The psychological shock for Japan, the attack was more than a military failure. It was a wound to national pride. For centuries, no foreign power had reached the Japanese mainland. The capital had stood untouched through natural disasters and civil wars alike. Now, a new kind of enemy had appeared, unseen, unreachable, and unstoppable. Even if the physical damage was limited, the psychological blow was immense. Japanese newspapers censored the news, reporting only minor damage. But rumors spread faster than censorship could control. People whispered of giant silver aircraft that came from nowhere and vanished into the clouds. Pilots described the B-29 as a shinen no kyofu, terror from the abyss. From that night onward, Japan knew the war had entered a new era, one where courage and swords could not reach the enemy. It is 12:10 a.m., November 24th, 1944. The first formation of B-29s crosses the shoreline of Japan. Below them, the lights of coastal towns flicker as anti-aircraft batteries come to life. Searchlights sweep the sky, their pale beams cutting across the darkness like swords. Inside the lead bomber, Colonel Robert Morgan leans forward in his seat. The aircraft shudders slightly in the jet stream. His bombardier peers through the Norden sight, the radar operator tracking coastlines through his glowing scope. They are 31,000 feet above Tokyo, higher than Mount Fuji's peak. Then, through the haze, a shadow appears, the sprawl of the Musashino aircraft plant. Target in sight, the bombardier reports. The intercom crackles with static as Morgan's voice cuts through. Open bomb doors. Cold air floods the cabin. Crewmen brace themselves. At 12:15, the first bombs fall. From the streets below, the sound arrives seconds later. A low, rolling thunder that builds into a steady rhythm. Glass shatters across neighborhoods miles away. The ground trembles as the first high-explosive rounds hit the factory complex. The sky comes alive. All across Tokyo, people awake to the sound of war. Civil defense sirens wail, echoing through narrow alleys and along the Sumida River. Families rush toward shelters, some clutching children, others frozen in doorways, staring at the glowing trails above. Fire brigades race through the streets, headlights dimmed, bells clanging. From the rooftop of the Imperial University, students assigned to the Volunteer Fire Corps watch the horizon ignite. A massive orange bloom rises behind the western districts, the Musashino plant burning like a beacon in the night. Overhead, the B-29 formation turns slightly eastward, dropping wave after wave of ordnance. Each bomber releases 10 tons of explosives, demolition bombs to break open buildings, followed by incendiaries to ignite the wreckage. The effect is terrifying. Within minutes, the factory roofs collapse inward. Flames climb hundreds of feet into the sky, but the Japanese response is already forming. The desperate defense. From Chofu Airfield, 3 squadrons of interceptors claw their way into the night sky. Their climb lights flash briefly before vanishing into the dark. Pilots strain against their controls as frost forms across their canopies. Second Lieutenant Yoshio Muto leads a small flight of Ki-44s toward the glowing city. His instruments flicker, altimeter needle trembling. At 20,000 feet, his breath fogs the mask. At 25,000, his controls feel sluggish. Ahead, faint, barely visible, silver dots drift across the moonlit clouds. He pushes the throttle forward. The engine screams. Tracer fire arcs upward, vanishing before it reaches the bombers. The Ki-44's guns jam under the cold. One pilot fires a burst, then watches the rounds drift harmlessly away, disappearing into blackness. From the ground, anti-aircraft guns open fire. Thousands of shells streak upward, leaving orange trails. The explosions bloom far below the bombers, like fireworks from another world. Inside the B-29s, the crews can hear the concussions. Distant, hollow thumps echoing through the fuselage. But the enemy is invisible. The Japanese gunners are shooting blind. Mechanical hell at 30,000 feet. The B-29s are not invincible. The jet stream, an unknown enemy, batters the formation. Winds exceed 180 miles per hour, tossing the aircraft like toys. Bomb doors refuse to close. Engines overheat. In Dauntless Dottie, the No. 2 engine bursts into flame, forcing Morgan to feather the propeller and cut power. Another bomber reports fuel leaks. A third loses cabin pressure. forcing its crew to don oxygen masks and descend directly into flak range. Navigator Lieutenant Evans notes the drift on his charts. Bombs are landing miles off target. The Musashino plant disappears in the haze, replaced by a growing firestorm of secondary explosions. In the chaos, radio chatter fills the air. Plane 3, engine 2's out. Keep formation. Altitude 31,000. Enemy fighters at 1 o'clock high. But few Japanese aircraft reach that height. Those that do attack from below, climbing into suicidal positions to fire a few desperate bursts before stalling out. One Ki-44 collides with a B-29's tail section, exploding into a white flare. The bomber spins downward, breaking apart over the suburbs. Its debris rains over a cluster of wooden houses, igniting more fires below. Tokyo in flames. From the ground, the view is apocalyptic. Flaming debris falls like meteors. The city's air raid wardens shout through megaphones, urging civilians to flee toward the rivers. But panic overwhelms order. The narrow streets become traps, smoke, heat, and confusion blending into chaos. One witness, a schoolteacher from the Setagaya district, later wrote, "The night sky was red. We could hear the planes, but they never seemed to move. The fire burned everywhere. The roofs, the roads, even the air seemed to glow." At 12:45 a.m., the bombing continues. The B-29s move in precise, relentless rhythm. Waves of silver giants crossing above the clouds, each one releasing destruction. By 1 a.m., the Musashino plant is gone. The fires have spread eastward, feeding on wooden homes and factories. Explosions echo across the city. In the command bunker beneath the Imperial Palace, General Teiichi Suzuki studies a map covered in red pins. "Impossible," he whispers. "They shouldn't have reached us." But the facts are undeniable. Tokyo, the heart of Japan, is burning. The retreat home. At 1:30 a.m., the order is given. Mission complete. The B-29s turn south toward the Pacific, climbing higher to avoid interception. From their tail guns, the crews watch the inferno shrink behind them. In the distance, the orange glow fades into a faint halo. For more than 200 miles, it remains visible. A fiery scar on the horizon. Radio transmissions crackle with quiet voices. Some crews cheer. Others sit in silence. One pilot mutters a prayer. Another, watching the smoke rise behind him, whispers, "That's what it looks like when history changes." By dawn, the horizon over Tokyo glows with a dull orange haze. The rising sun, once a national emblem, struggles to pierce the thick smoke hanging above the city. For hours, the fires rage unchecked. Hydrants have run dry. Fire brigades form bucket lines, passing water from wells and canals. Near the ruins of the Musashino aircraft plant, twisted girders rise like the skeletons of beasts. The air smells of burned oil and rubber. The first survivors emerge. Factory workers, volunteers, and soldiers. Their faces are gray with soot, their uniforms melted to their skin. They stumble through the debris, coughing, searching for familiar landmarks that no longer exist. At the Imperial University's engineering faculty, professors and students gather samples from the blast zone. They measure crater sizes, estimate explosive tonnage, and whisper to each other in disbelief. "This must be the American superfortress," one says quietly. "No fighter could fly this high." The word superfortress spreads across the capital that morning. Newspapers would later describe them as giant silver dragons. But for the men in uniform, there is no poetry, only humiliation. The meeting at Ichigaya. At 8 a.m., senior officers assemble inside the Ichigaya Army headquarters. General Hideki Tojo, now a shadow of the confident prime minister he once was, listens in silence as reports are read aloud. Estimated 30 to 40 enemy aircraft, an adjutant says. Target, Musashino Nakajima Aircraft Works. Damage, heavy structural loss, assembly lines destroyed. Another officer interjects. But production records show only limited disruption. Most machinery survived underground. The room falls silent. It becomes clear. Despite the scale of destruction, the Americans have missed their primary targets. The jet stream, still a mysterious phenomenon to meteorologists, had carried the bombs miles off course. For Japan's Air Defense Command, it's both a relief and a warning. If this was a small raid, what would happen when hundreds came? General Kawabe notes grimly, "We are now naked before the sky." The phrase circulates through the Japanese general staff like an omen. The return to Saipan. While Tokyo smolders, the B-29s begin their long journey home. Over the Pacific, many struggle with mechanical failure. One bomber loses fuel pressure and ditches near Iwo Jima. Another, limping on two engines, radios an SOS before disappearing into the clouds. The crews are exhausted. 10-hour missions through turbulence and freezing air. At 2 p.m., the first aircraft touches down at Isley Field. Ground crews rush forward as the giant planes taxi in, their aluminum skins blackened by oil and smoke. Colonel Morgan steps out of his cockpit, helmet tucked under his arm. His crew is silent. They've seen Tokyo burn, and they've lost friends along the way. A young ground officer approaches, clipboard in hand. "Mission success, sir?" Morgan hesitates. He looks toward the sea, where the sun dips below the horizon. "Depends on what you call success," he says quietly. Later, as intelligence teams debrief returning crews, the reality becomes clear. Bomb accuracy was abysmal. Less than 10% of ordnance struck the intended target zone. The Musashino factory is damaged, but far from destroyed. The disappointment is crushing. LeMay's arrival. Weeks later, a new figure arrives on Saipan. Major General Curtis LeMay. At 38, he is short, stocky, and unflinchingly direct. His reputation precedes him. Brilliant, ruthless, obsessed with efficiency. LeMay studies the mission reports from the Tokyo raid. He notes every failure: jet stream interference, mechanical breakdowns, poor bombing accuracy. He slams his hand on the table. "We're wasting fuel, and men trying to hit pinpoints from 6 miles up. We'll never beat Japan this way." What he proposes shocks even his staff officers. Abandon high-altitude precision. Fly low. Strip armor and guns from the B-29s to carry more bombs. Replace explosives with incendiaries. And burn Japan's wooden cities to the ground. It's a strategy born not of cruelty, but of cold calculation. The factories are hidden within civilian neighborhoods. Destroy the neighborhoods, and the factories die with them. The decision will change the nature of the Pacific Air War and transform Tokyo from a military target into a symbol of total destruction. The Japanese pilots dread. Meanwhile, in Japan, the surviving fighter pilots gather in tense silence at their bases. Many had climbed that night until their engines nearly froze, only to see the B-29s vanish into the stars. They are national heroes, yet powerless. Lieutenant Muto, the Ki-44 pilot who had attacked the bombers, sits beside his damaged aircraft. Frost coats the fuselage. His oxygen line is torn. He had fired all his ammunition and never once hit the enemy. Later, in his diary, he writes, "They came from nowhere, above the sky itself. We are like ants trying to bite an eagle." His words capture the feeling spreading across Japan's Air Force. Awe, fear, and inevitability. The B-29s are not just planes. They are the messengers of a new kind of war, one that Japan cannot match. A false calm. In Tokyo, the fires are finally extinguished after 36 hours. The air smells of ash and gasoline. Thousands are homeless, wandering among ruins. Yet, astonishingly, official broadcasts claim minimal damage and enemy repelled. People know better. At night, they look to the skies, waiting for the silver giants to return. And return they will, in numbers that no one can yet imagine. The first midnight raid over Tokyo had proved a terrifying truth. Japan was no longer safe behind its oceans, but it was only the beginning. The real storm, the firebombing campaigns, the March Inferno, the atomic end, still lay ahead. And from this night, one lesson echoes across both sides of the Pacific. When the superfortress appeared over Tokyo, the old rules of war died in its shadow. November 25th, 1944. The first light over Tokyo reveals a city unrecognizable. The air is thick with the acrid smell of ash and melted steel. Entire neighborhoods around Musashino lie flattened, not by shock waves, but by fire. Thousands of civilians move through the ruins in stunned silence. They carry what little they can, bundles of clothes, small wooden boxes of family relics. The silence is broken only by the creak of burned wood and the distant hum of army trucks. The Nakajima Aircraft Works, once the pride of Japan's aviation industry, now stands as a blackened frame. Charred fuselages lie scattered across the ground like the bones of mechanical animals. The assembly lines that once built the deadly Kai-43, Oscar, and Kai-84 Hayate fighters are twisted into unrecognizable scrap. Yet, miraculously, underground sections of the factory remain intact. Engineers report that production can resume within weeks. For the Japanese command, it's a strange blend of despair and defiance, proof that their spirit survives even when their cities burn. But, for ordinary citizens, the message is different. The sky, once a realm of clouds and gods, now belongs to the enemy. Shock in the Imperial Palace. Inside the Imperial Palace compound, Emperor Hirohito receives his morning briefing. The officials around him speak in measured tones, hiding their unease. The emperor listens quietly as reports describe the enemy's new long-range bomber and the damage to Tokyo. He asks only one question. Were they intercepted? The answer, a single word, hangs in the air. No. That failure echoes through every corridor of the military bureaucracy. Japan's air defenses, once confident in their ability to protect the homeland, have been exposed as fragile and outdated. At the Imperial General Headquarters, heated arguments erupt. Some officers demand immediate retaliation against Saipan. Others, more realistic, understand that Japan's reach no longer extends that far. The raid is a wound, not just physical, but psychological. For the first time in history, the Japanese people have seen their capital bombed by a foreign power. In the skies of the Marianas on Saipan, the atmosphere is grim. The success of the raid feels hollow. Of the 111 B-29s that took off, 7 have not returned. Mechanical failures, fuel exhaustion, and enemy action have claimed 56 men. Ground crews work in silence, repairing the battered aircraft. Mechanics scrape melted rubber from landing gear and patch bullet holes with aluminum sheets. Inside the officer's tent, mission photos are pinned to a wall. Black and white images of Tokyo, its districts outlined in chalk. The reconnaissance prints show the Musashino plant hit, but not destroyed. Bomb patterns are scattered, uneven. An intelligence officer sighs, "We spent $5 million to destroy a roof." The comment lingers in the air. For all the power of the superfortress, precision has failed them. The jet stream, that invisible force, has proven as deadly as any enemy. The birth of a new strategy. The analysis that follows changes everything. Commanders realize that the high-altitude approach, designed for accuracy and safety, is unreliable over Japan. Cloud cover, winds, and technical limits make it impossible to hit targets consistently. LeMay's doctrine, still on the drawing board, begins to take form. If the enemy hides their war industry inside wooden cities, then the cities themselves become targets. In early December, test raids with incendiary bombs are ordered. Pilots grumble about flying lower and stripping their defenses, but results speak louder than doubts. In just a few trials, entire districts are consumed by fire. The Americans now see the future, not in precision, but in fire. A city that refuses to bow. And yet, Tokyo endures. By December's end, repairs have already begun. Trains run again. Workers clear rubble and rebuild makeshift shelters. School children collect scrap metal for the army. Propaganda broadcasts call it proof of the emperor's divine protection. But deep down, the illusion of invincibility has cracked. Each night, people glance upward before sleep, listening for the distant growl of engines. Every breeze that passes over the rooftops reminds them of that midnight horror. In the heart of Tokyo, the surviving engineers of Nakajima write a simple message on the factory wall. "We will rebuild, even from ashes." They will. But the sky above them has changed forever. Weeks after the first midnight raid, U.S. analysts at Saipan finalize their reports. Charts cover every wall. Wind maps, bomb plots, fuel calculations. The data is irrefutable. The high-altitude precision strategy is a failure. At 30,000 feet, the jet stream bends bombs off course by miles. The cold shatters gun turrets and jams bomb bay doors. Crews suffer frostbite, oxygen failures, and mental exhaustion. For General LeMay, the answer is brutal but simple. We go lower. We burn them out. He orders radical modifications: remove armor, strip guns, increase payload. Instead of 500-pound high explosives, load 500-pound incendiaries. Phosphorus, magnesium, and jellied gasoline. Weapons made not to shatter concrete, but to consume wood and flesh. In briefings, LeMay's voice is calm, unflinching. You can't win a war by missing your target. You hit them where they live. The men listen in silence. They understand what he means. The next phase will not just target factories, it will target entire neighborhoods, and with them, tens of thousands of lives. The morality of that shift lingers unspoken, but the order stands: a new kind of war. By January 1945, the transformation is complete. B-29s fly low over the Pacific, painted black for night operations. Their bellies carry fire instead of bombs. The doctrine of strategic precision has given way to one of strategic annihilation. The midnight raid on Tokyo, once a tactical experiment, has become a model for total air warfare. In Tokyo, life continues under the illusion of safety. The newspapers call the November attack an isolated incident. But engineers at the Nakajima factory, now rebuilding for the third time, notice something unsettling. Every week, the sirens wail again. Small-scale raids hit Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe. Testing routes, timing, and incendiary patterns. What no one knows yet is that the Americans are rehearsing for the storm that will arrive on March 9th. The night Tokyo will become a sea of fire. The city rebuilds unaware that it is only practicing for its own destruction. The human toll. For the crews of the B-29s, victory feels colder than expected. They've flown farther than any bomber crews in history, across 3,000 miles of ocean, through freezing air and constant death. But many feel no triumph. Sergeant Harold Olson, a tail gunner from Iowa, writes home, "We saw Tokyo burn. It was beautiful and terrible. I can't forget how small it looked from up there." He doesn't know that similar fires will soon consume every major Japanese city, that what began as a single shocking mission will end with an empire in ashes. On the Japanese side, the psychological wound deepens. The government urges calm. School children drill in evacuation lines. Women weave camouflage nets for rooftops. Priests bless sand buckets and fire hooks. But fear is everywhere. Every wisp of cloud, every sound at night becomes suspect. People begin sleeping in their clothes, ready to flee at the first siren. The nation that once believed itself divine now realizes it can burn like any other. From Musashino to Hiroshima. In the halls of Allied Command, the November 1944 Tokyo raid is logged simply as Mission 13. Dante, but historians later recognize it as the beginning of the end. It marks the first time in human history that a capital city, the heart of a modern nation, was bombed by intercontinental aircraft. It proves that geography is no longer protection, and distance no longer guarantees safety. From that night onward, a line has been crossed. The lessons learned about incendiaries, altitude, and mass destruction directly lead to the firebombing campaigns of early 1945. And from those firestorms, the logic continues, colder, more mathematical, until August, when the Enola Gay rises into the sky with a bomb that will end the war entirely. The midnight over Tokyo was the prologue. Hiroshima would be the full sentence. Echoes across generations. In the decades that follow, survivors of the first raid tell their stories quietly. They remember the heat, the glow, the silence afterward. Many never blamed the Americans, they blamed the war itself, the leaders who promised protection and delivered only ashes. And for the U.S. veterans who flew that night, the memories never fade. Some speak proudly of their mission. Others, haunted by what followed, question what victory truly meant. History records it simply as a military operation. But in truth, it was a warning written in fire. Tokyo was no longer untouchable. The age of total war had arrived. And from that night onward, every city in the world would live beneath the shadow of the superfortress. When the first B-29s appeared over Tokyo at midnight, the world entered a new age. It was no longer a war of trenches or islands. It was a war of distance, fought between men who could no longer see the faces of those they killed. The superfortress was not just a machine. It was the embodiment of human progress, engineering genius, industrial might, and scientific ambition, all turned toward destruction. For the Americans, it symbolized technological triumph. For the Japanese, it became the shadow of inevitability. The moment they realized the war could no longer be won by courage alone. The men who flew those bombers were not monsters, and those who burned beneath them were not enemies. They were humans trapped within the machinery of history, both sides victims of the same relentless equation. Total war demands total sacrifice. As dawn rose over Tokyo's ruins, a question lingered, not just in Japan, but in every heart that watched the 20th century unfold. If technology gives us the power to destroy cities from the clouds, what does it take to keep our humanity on the ground? The fire that began over Musashino would one day consume Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And yet, from that fire, a new world would rise. One haunted, one wiser, one still uncertain of its limits. Today, the ruins are gone. Tokyo stands tall again, a city of light, born from ashes. But on quiet nights, when the wind blows from the east, some say you can still hear the faint echo of engines high above, the ghosts of the silver giants that came at midnight.